They didn't snatch a watch. They reached into my chest and tried to take the man who built me. By the time my phone rang, the sun had been chewing on a tin roof all morning, and I had mineral wool stuck to my neck like bad thoughts. I almost let the unknown number die under my glove, the way you let a wasp thud against a window until it quits. But something in my gut, same instinct that tells you a joist isn't true even before the level, said answer. Eli Hart. I grunted, squinting over the ridge cap. Mr. Hart, a tired voice rasped. Name's Ramon. I own Desert Star Pawn over on Solano. Figured I should make a call before I regret not making one. What kind of call? The kind where a man brings in an Omega Seamaster with an engraving that reads, "For Eli. Keep time, Dad." That mean anything to you? Everything in me went very quiet, the way a job site goes silent when a nail gun coughs wrong and men listen for the next sound, cry or cuss. I climbed down, boots scraping old shingles, heart suddenly misnailing. The blue watch box should have been in the desk drawer back at the barn, tucked behind invoices and a roll of painter's tape I never put away. I'd put it there because I was always in and out of the shop, because keeping something close feels like keeping it safe. I knew it was dumb even then, but I told myself dumb things in a calm voice, and that made it okay. I had told myself my mother didn't pick favorites too. I had told myself my stepbrother wouldn't try anything worse than a lie. Where'd you get it? I asked, voice dry as the roof I'd just left. Kid came in last night near closing, Ramon said. Tall, clean sneakers, haircut that's more appointment than accident. Said his name was Tyler. Said the watch was his father's. He was real proud of all the wrong details. My mouth had that copper taste you get when you bite back what you want to say. I'm 20 minutes out, I said, though it took 12. Desert Star Pawn is carrot orange cinder block with a sun-bleached sign that's lost 2 stars and half the A. It sits between a payday lender and a nail salon that sells epilators in a glass case like jewelry. I ditched the truck crooked, left the door hanging open, and walked into a smell like old pennies and hot dust. Behind a glass counter full of scratched phones and tangled chains, a heavy-set man with sleeves rolled to sunlight-tough forearms and a face like someone had carved patience into hard would put both hands down like he was bracing the building. You Eli? He asked. I am. No offense, he said, eyeing my jaw, but I could have guessed. You've got your old man's corners. He reached under the counter and set a blue leather box on the glass. The latch had a nick in it where my father's thumbnail always hit. Too hard, because he'd never learned gentle with objects. He was gentle with people until he wasn't. That's different. Ramon opened the lid with the care of a man who's seen value in things and in what those things carry. There it was. Seamaster, sunburst blue face, steel bracelet, little scar on the bezel where my father whacked it against a trailer hitch on a job he swore was haunted by an electrician who loved shortcuts. He had laughed so hard he coughed. Later, he couldn't laugh without wincing. Funny what life does with the same motions. I turned the watch over. Engraving hadn't moved. For Eli, keep time, Dad. The letters were deeper than the metal. My throat did that embarrassing ache I've always thought I aged out of. Who brought it? I asked anyway, even though the answer was already standing in my mother's kitchen in my mind, smirking in borrowed cologne. Tyler Beck, Ramon said. He said he was your brother, which I figured is more of a Facebook status than a fact. He sprayed his story around like cologne, but he didn't know how to say Seamaster right, and he didn't wear this like a thing you'd earn. I didn't buy it. Called you instead because of this. He slid a manila folder across. Inside, a grainy photocopy of an old pawn ticket, the paper soft as cloth. Patrick Hart. The serial number matched. A date from a lifetime ago. He pawned it. Ramon said, quiet, like telling me a secret. 17 years back. Took $2,000 against it. Brought me cash 3 weeks later. Said thank you twice. Took it home. Men like that make you believe in whatever you stopped believing in. I swallowed around a knot. He hadn't told me. That was like him. Carrying weight in silence to let me move easier. It made me love him and want to argue with a ghost. Watch this, Ramon said softly, like a magician who does one trick a year and it's worth it. He ran a thumbnail along the bracelet clasp, found a seam invisible to the lazy, and teased out a panel the size of a postage stamp. From the cavity, he coaxed a slip of yellow paper with a pair of tweezers. My father wrote in all caps, blocky and stubborn as him. Eli, if you find this, Go to Meridian Trust, Box 302. Keys taped under the 14 millimeters in my Husky. Love, Dad. I closed my eyes like that would keep something inside. It didn't. Ramon washed my face with the compassion of a man who runs a place people only come to for cash, or because they've run out of choices. Not to get in your life, he said, but a man who hides a note like that isn't hiding from trouble. He's saving time for someone he loves. I slid the watch onto my wrist. Metal cooled my pulse. It felt like the first drink of water after you forget you needed it. You going to talk to the kid? Ramon asked. I'm going to educate him, I said. Kindly ain't always on the menu. I left Desert Star with the watch snug and my future rearranging itself without asking permission. I didn't go back to the roof. I drove south, past stucco houses pretending to be 100 years old, toward a gated development with a name that brags about views no one looks at. The guard lifted the arm for me because my mother had put my name on the list after the last fight when she'd cried and said, "Your family," like that erased math. Her garage sat open. Carl's lifted golf cart, the proud toy of a man who wants to feel tall while seated, blocked the walkway like a sheriff. I didn't bother with the bell. I walked in like I used to walk in when I was 12, and they'd just moved into this fake hacienda with niches for expensive saints. Denise and Carl were at the table. Morning light came through the blinds in prison stripes. Stacks of paper fanned like the wings of a bird that tries to look bigger so it doesn't get eaten. Bank statements bleeding red like paper cuts. A printed GoFundMe page with Tyler's name at the top under a photo where he looks thoughtful. A legal pad with scribbles that read Tyler/pitch/loan back from ELI. I set the watch box down, not gentle and not hard. Just final. Lose something? I asked. My mother flinched. She went white in a way makeup can't fix. Carl Beck leaned back too far and caught himself on air. Where did you? My mother started, then tried a different sentence like changing keys. Eli, sweetheart, listen. I listened yesterday, I said. It said, we don't care how much this costs you as long as Tyler's dream doesn't sweat. You don't understand, Carl said. Doing that thing men do with their tone when they want to turn their voice into a room you'll get trapped in. He's got an app. Seed money. If we get him over this hump, it's all upside. The hump where he steals. I said, engravings don't lie. Serial numbers don't lie. Footage didn't lie for long either. Denise lifted her chin. That watch sat in your shop drawer, Eli. Not even a safe. What did you expect? He borrowed it. We were going to get it back before you even noticed. He borrowed my father? I asked, and surprised myself with how soft it came out. Carl tried to smirk and managed a purse. You get sentimental over steel, he said. That's why you'll never be big. I'm big enough to file a report, I said, sliding a copy across the table. The Desert Star logo, a still from the security camera with Tyler trying to stand casual, the timestamp, the clerk's statement. Consider yourselves perfectly looped. Denise's eyes filled the way they do when she wants to bargain with a past she insists is a misunderstanding. Don't ruin his life over a mistake. You mean the way he didn't mind ruining mine? Or the way you don't mind using my life like a bank? We're family, she said, as if she was saying, we're fireproof. Family is a verb, I said. You do it or you don't. Carl's face went mean. Men like him keep mean in their back pocket for when kindness doesn't get them what they want. Your dad would be ashamed you're doing this to your mother. My father had been a drywaller who could make a seam disappear between two sheets of stubborn. He hated lies that showed. My father would be ashamed I let you talk to me like that, I said, and walked. Sometimes the most adult thing a man can do is shut a door without slamming it. I drove to the house my father had rented for 15 years, the little cinder block place with a porch that slanted like an apologetic shrug and a chain-link fence I'd patched with a baking rack when I was 18 and broke. The new tenants kept the grass honest and the trash day straight. The old shed out back still stuck if you didn't lift and twist. I lifted, twisted, and breathed in oil and sawdust and a ghost called Pat. Under a tarp, his red Husky toolbox sat exactly where it always had, dented by an old fall that taught both of us to respect ladders. I flipped the lid. Sockets lay like coins in a small country. I counted with my fingers, 10, 12, past the sizes he used most, and stopped at the 14 millimeters like he told me from a watch I was supposed to keep closer. Tape leaves a smell. Old electrical tape leaves a memory. My fingertips slid under the rail, found sticky history, and there it was. a brass key wrapped in wax paper that made a crinkle my heart recognized. Meridian Trust lives in the oldest bank building in town, the kind you can point at and say that when tourists ask where the Real is. The lobby smells like lemon oil and a book about money. A woman with hair the color of winter steel looked up when I stood in front of her counter, holding my father's key like it was a confession. "I think I'm supposed to be here," I said, which is an odd sentence to say in a bank. "Pat Hart's boy," she said, and smiled in a way lipstick can't buy. He used to call me ma'am, even when I told him it made me feel like a fence post. In a private room the size of a good walk-in closet, she clicked the lock on box 302 and left me with a metal drawer and a small stack of paper that would redraw my map. Inside, a black ledger with corners rounded by use, a manila envelope with weight, and a smaller envelope with Yale written on it in a Sharpie that had bled slightly into cheap paper. He always put the accent on my name when he was being playful or when he wanted to make a point. I opened the letter like a man pries open a painted-shut window. "Eli, if you're reading, I ran out of tape in time. The watch will hold you when I can't. There's a list. The list is the work I did and the folks who paid and the folks who didn't. I didn't chase the last ones once the world started taking pieces out of me. You can. Or don't. Big envelope, bearer bonds. Don't laugh. You can cash them. Don't be stupid. Use them for air, not toys. Don't let anybody tell you what your future costs if they aren't willing to sweat for it. Make it yours. Dad. Sometimes love is a warm thing that sits in your chest. Sometimes it's a set of instructions written in a hand that used to steer your bike seat while you both ran." I slid my thumb under the gum of the big envelope. Out slid a stack of crisp bonds that made me feel like a man looking at lake ice trying to decide if it will hold. I counted 108,000 in anonymous paper. He had been tucking security away while he was building cupboards for people who thought his work ended at the hinge. The ledger was him exactly. Dates, job names, materials, labor hours, neat as a sermon. Beside some entries, he'd drawn little rectangles and colored them in, paid. Beside others, he'd left a blank like an accusation. One page had a name I knew from trucks that swing too wide and billboards that brag in blue letters. Suncrest Build Company, Commercial Fit Out, Arroyo Commons, $18, 400. NO check /MGR, on vacation X3. I sat at my own kitchen table that night with the ledger open and the 14mm socket beside it like a relic. I took pictures of every page. A buddy who frames houses swore by a lawyer who eats deadbeats for breakfast without getting any on her shirt. Her name was Kira Maldonado. Her office was up a flight of stairs above an insurance agency where the receptionist said, "Bless your heart," to people as if it were both greeting and diagnosis. Kira wore black jeans and bootcut confidence. Her conference room had 2 chairs and no art. "You're the guy," she said, flipping the ledger like a mechanic listens to an engine. "Your dad was a grown-up. You don't see that a lot." He wrote it like he expected to be taken seriously. "He wasn't always," I said, thinking about weekends he'd spent rehanging doors for free because the homeowner didn't like how they sounded when they closed. He kept trying anyway. She pushed a legal pad toward me. "We're going to do this like framing. Plumb and square. First, we liquidate those bonds quietly. Then, we send demand letters on the biggest delinquents with documentation so tidy even their lawyers will blush. After that, liens where we need to. Claims. Calls. I'm not interested in punishment. I'm interested in payment. Punishment's a side effect for people who avoid math." "How long?" "Quicker than you think. Slower than you want," she said, and smiled like she had learned humor in a shop class. 60 days for the first wires. 90 for the stubborn donkeys who think they invented contracts. The man at the bank who redeemed the bonds had golf hair and a smell like he had keys to every door that mattered. He made me sign twice, glanced at my calloused hands like that was a test I'd passed in advance, and handed me a receipt with more zeros than I had ever owned without sweating through a shirt. "Congratulations," he said, like he was the one to be thanked. I sat in the truck with the receipt and called no one. I don't know what people pray to when they don't pray. I put my forehead on the steering wheel and said, "Thanks, Dad." To the leather. Kira's first salvo went out on a Thursday. It was a letter that smelled faintly of toner and threat. Documentation attached, tone flat. CC to the kinds of people who don't like being copied on unflattering math. Suncrest Build called her office 2 days later, trying to talk past the invoice to an old boy handshake that didn't exist. She put them on hold and texted me. They're going to pay. I'm making them think it was their idea. A wire hit my account that afternoon for 18.4 and APS. That tasted like humble pie. 2 more checks arrived over the next weeks, small amounts that meant more than the numbers. An old dentist who'd stiffed my father 3 summers back wrote a personal note about miscommunication and closed with, "Your father was a craftsman." Kira sent me scans with the comment. People love to repent when a lien is hanging over their sign like a storm cloud. Not everyone repented. One outfit, Copper Ridge Developers, hired a lawyer who wrote like a man trying to impress himself in a mirror. Kira faxed him back 2 pages of my father's invoice, a signed delivery receipt, a text from a project manager who'd thanked Dad for saving our asses on that closet build, and a draft lien. Copper Ridge paid the next morning and asked if we could please not CC the property owner again. Kira replied with a smiley face which, in lawyer, is a middle finger dipped in frankincense. Meanwhile, my mother sent me 3 texts in a row that read like a weather report from someone who refuses to admit the sky is right there above your head. Eli, be reasonable. / you're tearing us apart. / think about family. I didn't reply because the word family means different things depending on who is saying it and why. Carl called from a different number and left a voicemail about short-term liquidity that ended with the sentence, "We'll make you whole," which is what men like him say when they want to eat you in pieces. I erased it before the beep ended. Tyler posted a glossy video of himself in a glass-walled office with a whiteboard that still had the pen cap on. He talked about iteration and pre-seed and runway. He never mentioned theft. A month later, his domain name went to a parked page about casino cruises. He tweeted, "Taking a breath, like rest is a strategy you choose instead of a mountain that sits on your chest when you finally stop dancing." I moved. Not far, just to a place that was mine every inch. A low ranch on a corner lot in a neighborhood where the trucks are older than the dogs, and all of them are loyal. The driveway had a crack that looked like a river. I liked it. The garage was deep enough to build a life in. I bought it with cash that smelled like paper and 20 years of uncashed pride. I didn't buy dumb. I bought quiet. A second-hand table that didn't wobble. A mattress that made my back forgive me. A ceramic mug that said good morning like it meant it. I set my father's husky toolbox along the back wall and hung a pegboard because order is both habit and shelter. Above the bench I screwed in a fluorescent light that hummed low. The sound is comfort to me. It's the heart of a place that works. I made a sign the size of a baking sheet and stenciled letters with a steadiness I didn't know I had. Heart handy. Honest work, honest rate. I stuck one on the grocery store bulletin board between a lost cat and a flyer for a church raffle where first prize is a smoked brisket. I posted the sign in 3 more places where people go when they need things fixed. The burner phone chirped itself into a calendar, a fan that wobbled, a dead outlet, a door that didn't sit square with its frame. I drove a used van that rattled like a drum set. I showed up when I said I would. People treat reliability like a miracle because they've forgotten it's just a decision repeated. Most days, I came home dog-tired. The good kind. The kind where you can count what you did because you can touch it. The watch lived on my wrist whenever I wasn't crawling under a sink or sticking my arm into an attic like I was reaching into the mouth of a beast to retrieve a tennis ball. Sometimes customers noticed it when I reached for a bracket or flicked a breaker. "Nice Omega," one man said. The kind of man who pronounces brands correctly as if that's a virtue. "Family peace," I said. "Keeps me punctual." At night, after the dishes and the quiet, I opened the tiny hiding place in the bracelet and unfolded Dad's note for the 100th time, the way you read a postcard from a city you never visited but can smell anyway. I traced the block E in my own name like it was a groove a finger could wear smooth. Kira closed the last of the ledger debts with an email that said, "All accounted for, except what can't be." We'd caught $42,000 that had been circling a drain, about to disappear into the story people tell themselves about what does and doesn't get paid. The bonds had given me air. The ledger had given me permission to breathe it. I went back to Meridian Trust with cookies in a plastic box because the woman with winter steel hair had made me remember kindness is a form of record-keeping too. She accepted them like a bank takes deposits, formally, with gratitude that matters. "Your father," she said, Always read the small print. He used to laugh at it. Said, that's where they hide the math. I gave money back where it mattered without telling the part of myself that still apologizes. The vocational school that taught me how not to electrocute myself received a donation big enough to buy a real table saw and 4 sets of PP. The director cried. He tried to shake my hand, and I handed him a hug instead. He told me I was an inspiration. I handed him a look that said, no, I'm just a grown-up. A woman at church whose porch had been sagging since her husband left said she couldn't afford my rate, and I said, that's okay. And we paid each other in lemonade and the satisfaction of a line returning to level. A teenage kid with pink hair and a shy way asked if he could ride along to Jobs to Learn, and I said only if he held the ladder without arguing about how. He did. He asked good questions. He didn't pretend to know everything. People who don't pretend are easy to teach. My mother sent a card at Christmas with a photo of a wreath on a stone fountain that isn't hers. Inside she wrote, we miss you. I put the card in a drawer. Missing isn't the same as loving. Missing can be hunger without change. Carl texted in spring, can we start over? I replied, you can start without me. He sent a thumbs up, the universal sign for a man who cannot imagine a world in which he does not get another chance. Tyler got a job selling something you can't touch. He posted photos of himself holding a microphone in rooms with LED lights, talking to men who look at their watches between slides about founder mindset. I hope he never steals again. Hope isn't a plan, but it's a hobby I allow myself in small, responsible amounts. Not everything was tidy. Not every night was clean sleep. Some evenings I sat at the workbench with my head in my hands and felt 12. Grief is a long piece of lumber. You think you've cut it to size, and then you realize the measurement was wrong, and you have to start over with a new angle. On those nights, I took the watch off and set it next to the 14 millimeters and tapped both like a metronome until my breathing learned the rhythm again. One afternoon, a man in a starched shirt called and offered to buy the watch for a fair price. He'd collect. I said, I'm not selling my father back, and hung up. Some decisions don't need committee. Not every debt belonged to me to collect. That's part of the lesson, too. You can chase until you turn into the thing you hate, hungry for the feeling of making someone do what you need. I collected what was owed to the man who taught me to hold a pencil like a chisel. I let go of the rest, and it hurt less than I expected. Sometimes forgiveness is admitting you'd rather build a porch than a case. A year after the day Ramon called, I stood under a pop-up tent at the fairgrounds on a Saturday that ticked like a sprinklers and lawnmowers song. The banner behind me read Hart Handy Tool Library in letters a kid named Mateo had painted with a seriousness that made me big inside. On the tables, refurbished drills, hand saws with new teeth, tape measures that weren't held together with hope and duct tape. We checked out tools like books to folks who don't have room or money to store the items adulthood requires you to own. A local station sent a camera with a reporter who asked me, why this? I said, because if you don't give people tools, you leave them with fines. She looked at me like that was a quote, and I laughed and said it wasn't. It was just true. A pair of old-timers in feed caps stood off to the side, watching me like they were measuring me against a story someone had told them. One came up and said, Patrick's boy? I said yes. He said, your dad fixed my shop door for free when a windstorm ripped it off its hinges. Said, can't have a man's work blowing out onto the street. I had to pretend to have a cough long enough to answer. He was like that, I said. Kira came by later with a yellow folder, and that look she gets when she's done something you'll thank her for before you even know what it is. Last check cleared, she said. Sun Mesa Storage. They cried on the phone. I didn't. That's not a service I provide. I hugged her because she doesn't like it, and she endured it like a professional. What do I owe you? I asked. Paid, she said. You wrote checks that didn't bounce. That's my love language. She looked at the tool table. This is a better revenge than any courtroom can give, she added, and I filed the sentence under things I will pretend I thought of myself. Later, when the sun was slanting just right and the tent ropes made shadows like strings on a map, a kid about 9 pointed at the watch and said, cool. I said, yeah. And his mother shushed him for pointing at nice things. I told her it was okay. Some nice things want to be pointed at because otherwise we forget they exist. A month after that, a cream envelope arrived with no return address and handwriting like a person trying on neatness. Inside, a cashier's check for $500 and a note. Mr. Hart, I approved invoices that weren't real. I justified it to myself, and then stopped justifying, and then stopped thinking. I heard what you did. Please use this for your library. I'm sorry. A person trying to be better. I laughed once, not mean. Okay, I said to the empty kitchen. Try. We bought 4 more tape measures that day. We labeled them with a Sharpie that bled into the plastic a little. Imperfect is still progress. Sometimes I get asked what I did to Tyler. People want a story with a loud ending. They want the scene where I served him papers, the courtroom, the gasp. I wish I had it for you. I have something I like more. I have a voicemail from a number I don't recognize where he says, in a voice that has finally met itself in the mirror, Eli, I screwed up, and I press save on it, not to play back when I want to feel tall, but to remind myself that remorse is a seed that might be watered without my help. What I did was this. I made it expensive to steal from us. I made it boring to argue with us. I made it better to change. And I made a life you could lean on with both hands and not have it give. I paid off the ranch. I helped a neighbor frame a porch on a weeknight because the air was nice and the sawdust smelled like forgiveness. I bought my mother a coffee at a church bazaar and did not stay for the part where she tried to explain the past into a new shape. I nodded when it was polite to nod. I left when it was time to leave. On the anniversary of the call from Desert Star, I drove back to Ramon's orange cinder block palace with a bakery box. He lifted the lid, sniffed, and said, Tres leches? You aiming to make me cry in my own store? We stood under fluorescent light and ate cake-off napkins. He held my watch for a second like a preacher holds a Bible. You look more like your father this year, he said. Not in the jaw, in the eyes. He always looked like he'd decided something and was done deciding. He wrote my homework, I said. He hid your homework, Ramon corrected. You turned it in. On some nights, very early before Arroyo Springs remembers what honking is for, I sit at the bench and listen to the watch without wearing it. There's a sound a mechanical movement makes that isn't a tick so much as a small argument the gears win by being patient. I wait until my lungs match. I put the watch back where it lives. I check the tape mark behind the 14 millimeters that no longer holds a key, but still holds a story. I touch the Husky's dent and the pegboard and the pencil nub I can't bring myself to throw away. People ask for morals like they're picking up prescriptions. Okay, I've got 2. Don't hand your future to anyone who doesn't get splinters for you. And if someone tries to steal a man who's already died, make sure the only thing they end up holding is their own reflection. The rest of it isn't revenge the way movies sell it. It's quieter and longer. It looks like a paid-off roof and a neon-free calendar. It looks like a ledger with boxes filled in and a lawyer who smiles without teeth. It looks like a pawn shop owner who does the right thing because that's the thing he does. It looks like a tool library in a fairground tent with kids learning how to read a tape, left to right and right to left, and women taking home a drill without asking for permission from a person who used to tell them no. It sounds like steel breathing in a bracelet and the word dad said into the air once in a while, just because. Once in a great while, driving my rattly van down Solano, I catch sight of my reflection in the glass of a dark storefront, and for a second I see him behind my shoulder. Not in a haunted way, in a supervising way. I don't turn. I just say, we're on schedule, out loud like a crazy person. He was the one who said, keep time. I've been trying.